Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my December wrap-up. I'm excited to go through all the books I read in December. It feels like it's been so long since December, even though it's only January 4th, but I did most of my reading this month at the beginning of the month, so that's probably why it feels so long since I've read these books. Anyway, if you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe down below so you don't miss out on any fun book videos from me in 2025. And without further ado, let's get into the wrap-up. We're just gonna go chronological order. I have some of the books with me, some of them I read on my Kindle, so I don't have them with me or I had to return them to the library, so we'll just put a picture up on the screen. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts on them are, and also let me know what your favorite book of December was. I would love to hear about what you're reading. First books we're gonna talk about are Christmas books. I filmed a Christmas book reading vlog, which is up on my channel. I did that for Bookmas, so if you want to watch that video, if you haven't, you can see even more of my thoughts on these books. But the first books I read in December were all Christmas books. So the first one was The Santa Suit by Mary Kay Andrews. This is a book about a woman who gets divorced and then buys this little farmhouse in this tiny town, and then it turns out that the previous owners of the house used to dress up as Mr. and Mrs. Claus for the whole neighborhood, and they were big Christmas people, and it's just a cute little story about community and finding the Christmas spirit again. This one was short and quick. I rated it a 3.25. The next book I read was Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This one was even shorter and even quicker, and I actually listened to this one on Audible. It was like one of their Audible Plus selection, and it was another sort of small town story about a man who's sort of confronting his past and also helping somebody in present day in the church. It was interesting, and then I watched the movie with, I think it's with Cillian Murphy, and that was really good. So I would recommend this one for the Christmas season. Put on your TBR for next year. It was a short, quick read. Lighting change. I'm playing around with a new ring light, and when it's so dark, it's just making me so red. I don't know how to change it. But anyway, next book I read was The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Allie Carter. This one was so fun. It was probably my favorite Christmas read of this week that I was reading Christmas books. It is a Knives Out sort of vibe story about these two authors that get flown to the secret place. They don't know where they're going. They just both kind of decide to go, and it ends up being this really famous author's house. Like, I was kind of thinking Agatha Christie, like the best mystery author in the genre, I guess, most famous mystery author, but then she disappears. So they're kind of figuring out this mystery. There's great banter in this book. It's an enemies to lovers sort of story that I could get behind, which is unusual for me because I don't love enemies to lovers. But I read this one super quick, thought it was really fun, and I really just loved the characters, and I was like laughing at some points it was really deep and somewhat emotional, and the vibes were just fantastic. So I rated this one a 4.25. And the next book I read on my Kindle, this one's on Kindle Unlimited. This is Holiday Romance by Catherine Walsh. This is another cute little romance story about these two people that end up flying home from Chicago to Ireland every Christmas at the same time. In the first couple years it was a coincidence, and then the years after they book their flights together, and it's like their time that they hang out, and they sort of communicate during the year, but they pretty much only hang out like on Christmas Eve as they're flying home. And this year their plane gets delayed or canceled, and then they have to do some sort of like planes, trains, automobile situation to get back to Ireland. In the middle I was sort of like, what's gonna happen next? I felt like we had resolved a lot of stuff, but then they were able to draw it out more, and not in a bad way, and I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was really cute. This one I thought was really good. I rated this a 4 stars, and I will definitely be reading more Catherine Walsh books in the future. Next book, this was the most boring of all of the Christmas books I read. It's called December to Remember, and it's about these 3 half-sisters who all share a father. They have different mothers, and they were all pretty much raised by their mothers, but every summer they would get together with their father for his like month of custody, and their father passes away. This is them as like adults now, and in order to get their inheritances from the will, he's left them a specific task, which is for them to make the winter solstice festival happen in their small town, and they have to like band together to make it happen. They all kind of have like problems with each other. They've grown estranged a little bit throughout the years. There's some little romance stories for each one of them, but honestly, when I switched from the audiobook to the book, it was so boring that I was like finding myself skimming, and so I listened to most of this, but honestly wouldn't recommend this one. I rated it a 3.25. Oh, I actually rated it a 3.5. I probably would rate this a 3. thinking back on it. The next book was my book club book for the month, which I also read on my Kindle. It's also in Kindle Unlimited, and this one is Before the Coffee Gets Cold. This book was amazing. I am interested to read the rest of the books in the series. I think there are 5 now, and it's a story about this cafe where you can go, and there's this special seat in the cafe where you can sit and you get a cup of coffee and you can travel in time, but there are lots of different rules, so you can only stay in the seat that you're sitting in with the coffee. It has to be at that specific table, and you can only stay in that past future time until your coffee gets cold, and you have to drink all your coffee before then. So it was interesting. It followed like 4 different character stories of their times like traveling in time for whatever specific reason, and most of them were for different relationships they had, like a partner or a sibling or a parent, and it was very emotional. 2 out of the 4 stories made me cry, and it was a very sweet story about sort of like perspective of your life and how your life connects with other people, and I would definitely recommend it. The next book I read, which was my first 5-star of the month, this is The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. I loved this book. It's about these 3 women who worked at Bletchley Park during World War II as code-breakers. They weren't all code-breakers, but they worked at Bletchley Park, which was a place that was doing the code-breaking during World War II. And it's kind of, the stories from Bletchley Park are just coming out more recently. I think a lot of that stuff was kept under wraps for a long time because everybody that worked there was not allowed to talk about it at all. It was supposed to be as secret as possible because obviously during World War II, you didn't know who was a spy, you didn't know who was going to betray you, and them doing this code-breaking helped win the war pretty much because they were able to intercept all of the enemy transmissions and translate them and code-break them. Anyway, it was fascinating. So this story follows these 3 women, and they each get their own little romance plot line. This is definitely a great intro to historical fiction if you like romance books mainly, because there is romance in here, and it was just so interesting to read about this. It was something I never knew about, and I feel like I learned so much. All of the characters had such spunk, and they were so fun to follow. Afterwards, we watched The Imitation Game, which is another story about Bletchley Park, so would recommend those 2 together. They're not the same story, but it's about the same place. So anyway, I loved it. I love historical fiction, and I loved Kate Quinn's writing. It reminded me a little bit of Kristen Hanna, so I would definitely recommend for fans of historical fiction, for people looking to get into historical fiction, for fans of Kristen Hanna. If you read books, you should read this one. Anyway, I loved this book. The next book I read, which is also by Kate Quinn, is called Signal Moon. It was like a quick little, it might have been an Audible original or something, but it was a quick little novella, and it was also about a woman who worked at Bletchley Park, and she intercepts a transmission that has a date of 2023 or something around like present day, our time, and she is compelled based on what the transmission was to try to help this person in the future. And it's such an interesting concept. They don't really go in too much about the logistics of that time situation, but it was a fun quick story. Another story about Bletchley Park, so it was a great follow-up to The Rose Code, even though none of the characters were the same. It was Kate Quinn's writing, and it was great. If you have Audible or Kindle Unlimited, I would definitely recommend it. The next book I read is the first nonfiction book I finished this month, which was White Tears, Brown Scars. The subtitle of this book is How White Women Betray Women of Color. It was basically an exploration of all of the different ways in which white women are harmful towards women of color, specifically in like a feminist lens. And it's really interesting because I think a lot of us as women, speaking from my personal experience as a white woman, like you don't realize things that you do or things that you partake in that affect other people, and I think that it's super important to be reading books like these to help you change your perspective and learn what you don't already know. And some of this stuff was definitely things that I'd like heard about before, but there was definitely some things that were brought to my attention that I didn't really think about before, and I thought it was really well done. I thought that it wasn't boring at all. Like the chapters were just the right length and there wasn't too much information, and it all tied into a lot of like present day culture. So I would definitely recommend this, especially if you are somebody who post-election was feeling really upset that your rights were being taken away, but you are a white woman, and it helps you gain perspective on how things affect other people, not just you. So, sorry if that's a little bit harsh, but that's just what this book is about. That's just what I believe. We're gonna leave it at that. The next book I read, which I really enjoyed, is When the Reckoning Comes. This is a story about a woman who left her small hometown in the South. It was segregated, and she pretty much has spent her adult life trying to forget about that past. And then she gets an invite to a wedding from her friend that she grew up with, and the wedding is in her hometown, and it's on this old plantation, and the plantation has been like redone to be like this living history museum. Anyway, she gets there and there's all of these weird things happening. It felt kind of like Get Out. Like the whole book gave Get Out vibes. Not the same plot, but just like the vibes. So if you like that movie, definitely read this book. And it's pretty short too, so definitely recommend it. But she gets there and all these weird things are happening. Like they're doing these like slavery reenactments, and then she starts to see all these things and it becomes somewhat supernatural, and she is reckoning with some event that happened in her past and what's going on this plantation in the future while her friend is getting married there, which is like such a weird place to get married, and a lot of interesting history that's being portrayed by these ghosts, we'll say. So anyway, I don't want to say any more about this book, but it was really good. The writing was really good. It was super eerie. Like the vibes of the place and the experience that was going on were super well done, and like I said, very much Get Out vibes. So if you like that movie, I would definitely recommend this one. I rated this one a 4.75. Okay, last few books. The next book I finished is The Comfort of Crows. This book I was reading throughout the year. It was on my top 24 TBR, and it's split up by week. So every chapter is like a season, week 1, week 2, whatever. So I was trying at the beginning of the year to read one chapter every week to align with whatever the season was at that time, and I didn't do that, so I ended up finishing it all at the end of the year, which is fine. It was still really good, and I will probably continue to pick it up throughout the year this year and match to like whatever the season is. Basically, it's this woman's backyard observations throughout the seasons. Just these short little chapters about nature. It was really beautifully written and I really enjoyed it. The next book I read was Molokai. My grandma gave this book to me and I had it on my shelf for a little while, and then now that I've been getting back into my historical fiction, I decided to pick it up. This is a story about a young girl named Rachel who gets leprosy. And it starts in the late 1800s, and in Hawaii in that time there was a lot of trouble with disease because they were isolated and they didn't have the immunity for these illnesses that people were bringing from the mainland, and they were getting really sick with all of these different diseases that their bodies weren't prepared for because these people were like invading their land pretty much, and leprosy was one of them. So in this time, what happened to people with leprosy was that they were shipped off to an island and they all lived there like quarantined on the island. And such an interesting history that I knew nothing about. There is so much history to Hawaii, and I feel like with this book it spanned like this woman's whole life pretty much. So it started in the late 1800s and went like into 1950, 1960, and so there was a lot that was touched on but not like super deeply gone into, I guess. But the main thing was obviously about her living in this leprosy settlement, which was on the island of Molokai. So she grows up there. She goes there when she's 5 or 6, and then she has to live there because she is contagious. So they think it was a similar disease to, like, think about the AIDS epidemic in the United States, where we didn't really know much about it and it became this super taboo thing, and everybody was freaking out that they would get sick if they were even around one of these people. So that was a similar thing, and medicine was not super advanced compared to how it is today. So anyway, she goes through a lot in this book, and I was really connected to her as a character. At the beginning I was kind of like, oh, she seems a little bit annoying, but then I was like, okay, this position that she's in is so difficult, to be taken away from your whole family and to have to grow up isolated on this island, and the way that she sort of makes a life for herself and in the community that she's in is fascinating. So I really enjoyed this book. I would absolutely recommend it. This is the sort of history that I'm sure if you're watching you probably know nothing about, because I've never heard anybody talk about it, but I think that this book did a really good job explaining what happened while keeping it interesting, and it was a fiction story. So I would definitely recommend this for anybody, especially if you like historical fiction, and I rated this one a 4.5. Okay, last book of December and last book of the whole year was Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And let me just say, this book has been on my TBR for years, literally over 3 years. I got this book for Christmas, I think 3 years ago. The subtitle on this book, which perfectly explains it, says Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. And it goes through a lot of different things, a lot about the environment and a lot about her indigenous culture. And I learned so much. I love her perspective on life and on the earth and how we can connect with the earth and how important that is in the climate that we're living in today. It was so beautiful. A lot of different essays. This is definitely a book that you can like pick up here and there. This is honestly a must read for everybody. So if you haven't read this book, don't be intimidated by it because it is a little bit long. I procrastinated reading it for a while because I wanted to make sure I committed to reading it. So I think this is something that I will pick back up just like The Comfort of Crows and read chapters here and there when I feel like I need them or I want to experience one of these chapters again. But it was so well done, and I just think this is like a must read for everybody. So if you haven't read this book, make sure it goes on your TBR for 2025. And with that, we are all done with my December wrap up. Thank you guys so much for watching all the way till the end. Again, let me know if you've read any of these books. Would love to know your opinions. Let me know which of these books I've convinced you to add to your TBR. Hopefully at least 1 or 2. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any more videos from me. And I will see you guys next time. Bye, friends.